everyone, my name is Sunan Okura from my university in Germany. In this presentation, I will discuss the existence of two typefaces in drawing from a historical perspective, a phenomenon I refer to as typograph models. First, I will explain the background of this research, followed by an explain of the concept of typography and typograph models. After that, I will present the results of quantitative and qualitative analysis of my dataset and summary. Recent studies on typography within linguistic landscapes research have significantly developed over the past few decades, and this study treats itself within that realm. My doctoral research is currently ongoing. It examines the use and perception of typefaces in Germany between 1860 and 1960, comparing multiple cities and analyzing both urban signage and printed materials. In this presentation, I will focus on Berlin's typographic landscape in the first half of the 20th century as one case study from my doctoral thesis. Here, I'd like to show an example of the typographic landscape. And the two images above show the building at Fischerstraße 21 in Berlin, and those below show Fischerstraße 28. At some point, both buildings changed their typeface usage. Why did this happen? And does a change in typeface have meaning? This serves as the starting point of my research. So my research questions for this presentation are as follows. Actual use of typography. What was the actual state of typeface use in Berlin in the first half of the 20th century? Perception of Blackletter. How was Blackletter perceived at that time? In Germany, Blackletter and Roman typefaces were used side by side until the middle of the 20th century. The typefaces shown here were commonly used in everyday life in Germany. In Germany, the following typefaces practices have become conventional in printed material. Following words were set in Roman typeface within Blackletter body text. Different typefaces were used for headings and body text, and typefaces were even mixed within single line. I would now like to present a particularly interesting example of this last practice. As the German grammarian Adrian noted, words with polling stands and German endings were sometimes written half in Roman typeface and half in Blackletter. This is an example of such mixed typeface used within a single word. Such coexistence of typefaces began to be formally debated in the 19th century. As you can see here, despite repeated reform efforts, Blackletter remained in use until it was officially banned in 1941. Notably, the Nazi regime had actively used Blackletter for propaganda before imposing this ban. A central issue in these debates concerned with race, Roman typefaces and Blackletter were perceived. Roman typefaces were associated with internationality, whereas Blackletter was associated with national identity. And the debates in Germany also had an impact on Japan. A similar discussion on script choice were taking place in Japan at the same time between the nationality and national identity. I mentioned Japan here because I'd like to turn to the concept of digraphia and digraphomorphism. In linguistics, bilingualism is referred to as digraphia. Building on this analogy, the concept of digraphia is generally defined as the use of two different types and different scripts, writing systems or orthographies for the same language. However, this definition encompasses phenomena that operate at fundamentally different levels, and the terminology has remained inconsistent across the literature. For example, in Japanese, my first language, my name can be written in hiragana, katakana, kanji, and Latin alphabet, but the pronunciation remains the same, Sunan, and here multiple script coexist. In German, Blackletter and Roman typefaces both belong to the Latin alphabet. But the difference is not the script, but the typographic form, a fundamentally different phenomenon from what we see in Japanese. Scholars such as Lucic have pointed to this terminological inconsistency and proposed more precise classifications, including the concept of big prefixes. In this presentation, I use the term digraphomorphism as an analytical concept to refer to multiple typographic forms coexisting within a single writing system, and to examine the semiotic functions they carry usually about this. Previous research has identified two main lexical functions of the Blackletter. The first is tradition, evoking German identity through contexts such as traditional food advertising and newspaper titles. The second is ideology. Blackletter had been strongly associated with nationalism and national socialism, and was actively used by the Nazi regime. Also, the Nazis ultimately banned it in 1941, as we saw earlier. This association has persisted to the present day. Now, I will explain my dataset. The object of my study is signage in public space in Berlin. The dataset was collected using the Landesarchiv Berlin online database. The analysis covers the period from 1900 to 1950. These are some examples from my dataset and showing actual uses of Blackletter and Roman typefaces in Berlin's urban space. And the following examples show cases where both typefaces are used simultaneously within a single sign. I organized my dataset using a pair table structured into 3 parts. This chart summarizes the number and percentage of each typeface used by year. As can be seen here, in Berlin during the first half of the 20th century, Roman typefaces were overwhelmingly dominant. However, the usage of Blackletter increased from 1930. And I focused specifically on the use of Blackletter and script, but data not in 5-year intervals, but according to historical context. This reveals that the use of Blackletter clearly increased from 1933 onward. However, even in this case, the proportion remains kept at around 10%. This indicates that Roman typefaces still overwhelmingly dominated the typographic landscape of the city. The use of Blackletter in printed materials from the same period shows a different pattern. Up until around 1938, it was used at a rate of approximately 45% to 60%. This differs significantly from its usage in art space. However, this proportion includes books and pamphlets as well as materials in foreign languages published in German-speaking region, so it should be interpreted with caution. Next, I will discuss the top-down and bottom-up signage. Commercial signage represents a bottom-up signage. In this dataset, commercial signs accounted for 86.6% of these Blackletter accounted for 3.3%, while Roman typefaces accounted for 96.7%. According to Semiotic, in advertisements, typefaces, font size, cards, and sheets are used deliberately to attract attention and evoke emotions that promote sales. Here, the focus is on attention grabbing and sales promoting effects. Roman typefaces characterized by greater visibility and a sense of modernity were therefore likely that required choice in commercial signage. However, there are exceptions. The signage of the Berliner Lokalanzeiger newspaper office used Blackletter, matching the masthead of the printed newspaper. This can be understood in terms of the modern concept of corporate identity. In this context, Blackletter functioned as a visual marker of the newspaper's identity. Next is top-down signage. This mainly refers to infrastructure-related signage, and it makes up only about 5.4% of the dataset. Of this, Blackletter accounted for 11.9%, and Roman typefaces accounted 88.1%. According to Huffman, in 1935, Blackletter supported group requested to switch to Blackletter in road signs, but this was rejected by the government due to disability concerns and consideration for foreigners. This suggests that disability and internationality were key factors influencing typeface selection. From here, I will discuss examples of typeface changes. The buildings erected in the 16th century on Fischerstraße changed their lettering in the first half of the 20th century. I showed these buildings photos at the beginning of my presentation, The lettering was changed from Roman typefaces to Blackletter. And this reading was also shown at the beginning of my presentation, and its lettering was similarly changed from Roman typefaces to Blackletter. A reason for these changes couldn't be found in the literature. However, a travel look by author Heilbron in 1925 described Fischerstraße as retaining its unique historical atmosphere, including decorative house signs. This suggests the street already had a heritage-rich character before the place changes occurred. Mills found that direct blackletter and traditional material combinations together express tradition, heritage, and orientation toward the past. Based on Heilbron's description of Fischerstraße as the historically shaped bridge, it is likely that the typeface change here was intended to evoke a similar sense of tradition. To summarize the analysis, Blackletter carries the lexical function German identity and tradition, while Roman typefaces were associated with internationality and visibility. These functions operated across both commercial and political contexts. So their relative weight differs depending on the situation. It can be argued that in early 20th century Berlin, each typeface carried both practical and symbolic functions simultaneously. This study is part of my larger ongoing project. I hope to share future findings, including comparisons across multiple cities and between urban signage and printed materials with you at a future conference. And the references for this presentation are listed here. Thank you for your attention.
Sunan. Questions, please. I'll ask you a slightly off-center question. It might be a little bit difficult. So at the beginning of the 20th century in Germany, in addition to Blackletter and Roman, there was a kind of group or category of letter forms and typefaces that were hybrid in nature, that combined both Roman elements and broken script or Blackletter elements. Does that come into your consideration at all when you, because at the moment you've got Roman and Blackletter, do you consider this intermediate period? Is that at all part of your showing up in your data?
So in the city, I didn't find such a combination with Roman typefaces and Blackletter, but in printed materials, it comes in every day. So it is different between the city and printed materials.
And does that suggest then that possibly typeface designers and type foundries were interested in those sorts of hybrid experimentations, but sign writers, for example, were not? Would that be an intuition?
Yeah, I think so. In printed materials, maybe people can easily, as I said, set typeface, but in city, it's a little bit difficult to change typefaces, or maybe it's a combination with also both typefaces.
Yes.
I would like to hone in on this question of different scripts versus different typefaces again, maybe because I think this question for Blackletter specifically versus Antigua or whatever is actually pretty difficult, because it's not like when you exchange serif or sans serif font. At least in German, you have these conventionalized ligatures, you have some orthographic differences with the S or something, different word separation of lines, and also at least many people at the time perceived them to be different scripts. So I remember like one atlas of writing systems of the world, where in Europe you have Latin script and Cyrillic script and Greek script, and then in the middle there's German script, so Blackletter. And I wonder whether the word typeface, which when I think of typeface, I think like Times New Roman versus Arial or something, really does that justice.
It's a good question, I say. As I said about Japanese and how can I say, the example of the script, of the Japanese script, it's very different, I think. And even though we use katakana, we can switch katakana and hiragana in a script, but in a text, but these are, how can I say, these different from different other countries. So I think it's not very similar, like debates of typefaces like Blackletter and normal typefaces. And you told me about the German script, and yeah, sometimes also in the context of the two typefaces in Germany. Well, I heard also that the Blackletter is really German script, so that we people should differ between these both typefaces. But I think both typefaces are still Latin alphabet, so what can I say? I'm not sure what I should say, but I think it's not like Arabic and Latin alphabet or hiragana and kanji or something like that. Sorry, I'm not sure if I could understand your question.
I do not understand how do research reflect the Nazis' ban for Blackletter, because like this example showed very good, but regarding the building science, it's confusing the information you gave because there's no ban. And I want to add, it's not like very academic, but there's a story that I know I'm from Israel, that the Blackletter was banned. One of the reasons is that its similarity to Hebrew, to the Jewish typeface, and that there was a sentence that said that it's their language, their letters, and not ours. We are German. We are new. So I think it's a very important point for your research, and I didn't understand it from your presentation.
Okay, so
What do you understand with this?
so the reason of banning by Nazi regime is quite easy. So they wanted to expand in the Europe, so that they wanted to give up the blackface because other foreigners couldn't lead these blackfaces. And but still after the war, there are some examples like this. So another political parties used also the Blackletter, and also after the World War II. So I think in Germany, people thought that the Blackletter was not really German, but something like the typeface or Nazi German, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.